Brief History of the Empire, Part 1, by Strona Cathorgi III, Imperial Historian. Before the rule of Tiber Septim, all Tamriel was in chaos. The poet, Tresises, called that period of continuous unrest days and nights of blood and venom. The kings were a petty lot of grasping tyrants who fought Tiber's attempts to bring order to the land. But they were as disorganized as they were dissolute, and the strong hand of Septim brought peace forcibly to Tamriel. The year was the Second Era 896. The following year, the Emperor declared the beginning of a new era. Thus began the Third Era, Year Ort. For 38 years, the Emperor Tiber reigned supreme. It was a lawful, pious, and glorious age, when justice was known to one and all, from serf to sovereign. On Tiber's death, it reigned for an entire fortnight, as if the land of Tamriel itself was weeping. The Emperor's grandson, Pelagius, came to the throne. Though his reign was short, he was as strong and resolute as his father had been, and Tamriel could have enjoyed a continuation of the Golden Age. Alas, an unknown enemy of the Septim family hired that accursed organization of cutthroats, the Dark Brotherhood, to kill the Emperor Pelagius I as he knelt at prayer at the Temple of the One in the Imperial City. Pelagius I's reign lasted less than 3 years. Pelagius had no living children, so the crown imperial passed to his first cousin, the daughter of Tiber's brother Agnorith, Kintria, former queen of Selvanar, assumed the throne as Kintria I. Her reign was blessed with prosperity and good harvests, and she herself was an avid patroness of art, music, and dance. Kintria's son was crowned after her death, the first emperor of Tamriel to use the imperial name Uriel. Uriel I was the great lawmaker of the Septim dynasty, and a promoter of independent organizations and guilds. Under his kind but firm hand, the Fighters Guild and the Mages Guild increased in prominence throughout Tamriel. His son and successor, Uriel II, reigned for 18 years, from the death of Uriel I in the Third Era 64 to Pelagius II's ascension in Third Era 82. Tragically, the rule of Uriel II was cursed with blights, plagues, and insurrections. The tenderness he inherited from his father did not serve Tamriel well, and little justice was done. Pelagius II inherited not only the throne from his father, but the debt from the latter's poor financial and judicial management. Pelagius dismissed all of the elder council, and allowed only those willing to pay great sums to resume their seats. He encouraged similar acts among his vassals, the kings of Tamriel, and by the end of his 17-year reign, Tamriel had returned to prosperity. His critics, however, have suggested that any advisor possessed of wisdom but not of gold had been summarily ousted by Pelagius. This may have led to some of the troubles his son Antiochus faced when he in turn became emperor. Antiochus was certainly one of the more flamboyant members of the usually austere Septim family. He had numerous mistresses and nearly as many wives, and was renowned for the grandeur of his dress and his high good humour. Unfortunately, his reign was rife with civil war, surpassing even that of his grandfather, Uriel II. The War of the Isle in Third Era 110, 12 years after Antiochus assumed the throne, nearly took the province of Somerset Isle away from Tamriel. The united alliance of the kings of Somerset and Antiochus only managed to defeat King Orgum of the island kingdom of Piondia due to a freak storm. Legend credits the Sigic Order of the Isle of Artaeum with the sorcery behind the Tempest. The story of Kintria II, heiress to her father Antiochus' throne, is certainly one of the saddest tales in imperial history. Her first cousin, Uriel, son of Queen Fatima of Solitude, accused Kintria of being a bastard, alluding to the infamous decadence of the imperial city during her father's reign. When this accusation failed to stop her coronation, Uriel bought the support of several disgruntled kings of High Rock, Skyrim and Morrowind, and, with Queen Fatima's assistance, he coordinated 3 attacks on the Septim Empire. The first attack occurred in the Iliac Bay region, which separates High Rock and Hammerfell. Kintria's entourage was massacred and the Empress taken captive. For 2 years, Kintria II languished in an imperial prison, believed to be somewhere in Glenpoint or Glenmoral, before she was slain in her cell under mysterious circumstances. The second attack was on a series of imperial garrisons along the coastal Morrowind Islands. The Empress's consort, Contin Arienx, fell defending the forts. The third and final attack was a siege of the imperial city itself, occurring after the Elder Council had split up the army to attack western High Rock and eastern Morrowind. The weakened government had little defence against Uriel's determined aggression, and capitulated after only a fortnight of resistance. Uriel took the throne that same evening and proclaimed himself Uriel III, Emperor of Tamriel. The year was 3rd Era 121. Thus began the War of the Red Diamond, described in Volume 2 of this series. A Brief History of the Empire, Part 2, by Stronach Thoj III, Imperial Historian. Volume 1 of this series described in brief the lives of the first 8 emperors of the Septim dynasty, beginning with the glorious Tiber Septim and ending with his great-great-great-great-grandniece, Kintria II. Kintria's murder in Glenpoint, while in captivity, is considered by some to be the end of the pure strain of Septim blood in the imperial family. Certainly it marks the end of something significant. Uriel III not only proclaimed himself Emperor of Tamriel, but also Uriel Septim III, taking the eminent surname as a title. In truth, his surname was Mantiarco, from his father's line. In time, Uriel III was deposed and his crimes reviled, but the tradition of taking the name Septim as a title for the Emperor of Tamriel did not die with him. For 6 years, the War of the Red Diamond, which takes its name from the Septim family's famous badge, tore the empire apart. The combatants were the 3 surviving children of Pelagius II, Fatima, Sepphoris, and Magnus, and their various offspring. Fatima, of course, supported her son Uriel III and had the combined support of all of Skyrim and northern Morrowind. With the efforts of Sepphoris and Magnus, however, the province of High Rock turned coat. The provinces of Hammerfell, Somerset Isle, Valenwood, Elsewhere, and Black Marsh were divided in their loyalty, but most kings supported Sepphoris and Magnus. In the Third Era 127, Uriel III was captured at the Battle of Ichidag in Hammerfell, en route to his trial in the Imperial City. A mob overtook his prisoner's carriage and burned him alive within it. His captor and uncle continued on to the Imperial City, and by common acclaim was proclaimed Sepphoris I, Emperor of Tamriel. Sepphoris's reign was marked by nothing but war. By all accounts, he was a kind and intelligent man, but what Tamriel needed was a great warrior, and he, fortunately, was that. It took an additional 10 years of constant warfare for him to defeat his sister Fatima, the so-called Wolf Queen of Solitude, who died in the siege of her city. or city-state in the year 137. Sepphoris survived his sister by only 3 years. He never had time during the war years to marry, so it was his brother, the 4th child of Pelagius II, who assumed the throne. The Emperor Magnus was already elderly when he took up the imperial diadem, and the business of punishing the traitorous kings of the War of the Red Diamond drained much of his remaining strength. Legend accuses Magnus's son and heir Pelagius III of patricide, but that seems highly unlikely, for no other reason than that Pelagius was king of Solitude following the death of Potima, and seldom visited the imperial city. Pelagius III, sometimes called Pelagius the Mad, was proclaimed emperor in the 145th year of the Third Era. Almost from the start, his eccentricities and of behaviour were noted at court. He embarrassed dignitaries, offended his vassal kings, and, on one occasion, marked the end of an imperial grand ball by attempting to hang himself. His long-suffering wife was finally awarded the regency of Tamriel, and Pelagius III was sent to a series of healing institutions and asylums until his death in the Third Era, 153, at the age of 34. The Empress Regent of Tamriel was proclaimed Empress Kateria I upon the death of her husband. Some who do not mark the end of the Septim bloodline with the death of Kintria II consider the ascendancy of this dark elf woman the true mark of its decline. Her defenders, on the other hand, assert that though Kateria was not descended from Tiber, the son she had with Pelagius was, so the imperial chain did continue. Despite racist assertions to the contrary, Kateria's 46-year reign was one of the most celebrated in Tamriel history. Uncomfortable in the imperial city, Kateria travelled extensively throughout the empire, such as no emperor had ever since Tiber's day. She repaired much of the damage the previous empire's broken alliances and bungled diplomacy created. The people of Tamriel came to love their empress far more than the nobility did. Kateria's death in a minor skirmish in Blackmarsh is a favourite subject of conspiracy-minded historians. The sage Montelius's discovery, for instance, of a disfranchised branch of the Septim family, and their involvement with the skirmish was a revelation indeed. When Cassander assumed the throne upon the death of his mother, he was already middle-aged. Only half-elven, he aged like a Breton. In fact, he had left the rule of Wayrest to his half-brother Uriel due to his poor health. Nevertheless, as the only true blood relation of Pelagius and thus Tiber, he was pressed into accepting the throne. To no one's surprise, the Emperor Cassander's reign did not last long. In 2 years, he joined his predecessors in eternal slumber. Uriel Lariat, Cassander's half-brother, and the child of Kateria I and her imperial consort Galavia Lariat, after the death of Pelagius III, left the kingdom of Wayrest to reign as Uriel IV. Legally, Uriel IV was a Septim. Cassander had adopted him into the royal family when he had become king of Wayrest. Nevertheless, to the council and the people of Tamriel, he was a bastard child of Kateria. Uriel did not possess the dynamism of his mother, and his long 43-year reign was a hotbed of sedition. Uriel IV's story is told in the 3rd volume of this series. A Brief History of the Empire, Part 3, by Stronach Thodge III, Imperial Historian. The 1st volume of this series told in brief the story of the succession of the first 8 emperors of the Septim dynasty, from Tiber I to Kintria II. The 2nd volume described the War of the Red Diamond and the 6 emperors that followed its aftermath, from Uriel III to Cassander I. At the end of that volume, it was described how the Emperor Cassander's half-brother, Uriel IV, assumed the throne of the Empire of Tamriel. It it will be recalled that Uriel IV was not a septim by birth. His mother, though she reigned as empress for many years, was a dark elf married to a true septim emperor, Pelagius III. Uriel's father was actually Cataria's first consort after Pelagius's death, a Breton nobleman named Galavir Lariat. Before taking the throne of the empire, Cassindir I had ruled the kingdom of Wayrest, but poor health had forced him to retire. Cassindir had no children, so he legally adopted his half-brother Uriel and abdicated the kingdom. 7 years later, Cassindir inherited the empire at the death of his mother. 3 years after that, Uriel once again found himself the recipient of Cassindir's inheritance. Uriel IV's reign was a long and difficult one. Despite being a legally adopted member of the Septim family, and despite the Lariat's family's high position indeed they were distant cousins of the Septims, few of the Elder Council could be persuaded to accept him fully as a blood descendant of Tiber. The council had assumed much responsibility during Cataria I's long reign and Cassindir I's short one, and a strong-willed alien monarch like Uriel IV found it impossible to command their unswerving fealty. Time and again the council and emperor were at odds, and time and again the council won the battles. Since the days of Pelagius II, the Elder Council had consisted of the wealthiest men and women in the empire, and the power they wielded was conclusive. The council's last victory over Uriel IV was posthumous. Andrak, Uriel IV's son, was disinherited by vote of council, and a cousin more closely related to the original Septim line was proclaimed Sepphoris II in the Third Era 247. For the first 9 years of Sepphoris II's reign, those loyal to Andrak battled the imperial forces in an act that the sage Eretine called Tiber Septim's heart beating no more. The council granted Andrak the High Rock Kingdom of Schorlhelm to end the war, and Andrak's descendants still ruled there. By and large, Sepphoris II had foes that demanded more of his attention than Andrak. From out of a Cimmerian nightmare, in the woods of Eretine, a man who called himself the Camoran Usurper led an army of Daedra and undead warriors on a rampage through Valenwood. Conquering kingdom after kingdom, few could resist his onslaughts, and as month turned to bloody month, in the year Third Era 247, even fewer tried. Sepphoris II sent more and more mercenaries into Hammerfell to stop the usurper's northward march, but they were bribed or slaughtered and raised as undead. The story of the Camoran usurper deserves a book of its own. It is recommended that the reader find Palais Uthres, The Fall of the Usurper, for more detail. In short, however, the destruction of the forces of the usurper had little to do with the efforts of the empire, or emperor. The result was a great regional victory and an increase in hostility toward the seemingly inefficacious empire. Uriel V, Sepphoris II's son and successor, swiveled opinion back toward the latent power of the empire. Turning the attention of Tamriel away from internal strife, Uriel V embarked on a series of invasions, beginning almost from the moment he took the throne in Third Era 268. Uriel V conquered Roscrea in 271, Cathnaque in 276, Incelia in 279, and Esrinet in 284. In Third Era 288, he embarked on his most ambitious enterprise, the invasion of the continent kingdom of Akavir. This ultimately proved a failure, for 2 years later Uriel V was killed in Akavir on the battlefield of Loneth. Nevertheless, Uriel V holds a reputation second only to Tiber as one of the two great warrior emperors of Tamriel. The last four emperors, beginning with Uriel V's infant son, are described in the fourth and final volume of this series. A Brief History of the Empire, Part 4, by Stronach Thoj III, Imperial Historian. The first book of this series described in brief the first 8 emperors of the Septim dynasty, beginning with Tiber I. The second volume described the War of the Red Diamond and the 6 emperors who followed. The third volume described the troubles of the next 3 emperors, the frustrated Uriel IV, the ineffectual Sepphoris II, and the heroic Uriel V. On Uriel V's death across the sea in distant hostile Akavir, Uriel VI was but 5 years old. In fact, Uriel VI was born only shortly before his father left for Akavir. Uriel V's only other progeny by a morganatic alliance were the twins Morihatha and Eloisa, who had been born a month after Uriel V left. Uriel VI was crowned in the 290th year of the Third Era. The imperial consort Thonica, as the boy's mother, was given a restricted regency until Uriel VI reached his majority. The Elder Council retained the real power, as they had ever since the days of Catariah I. The council so enjoyed its unlimited and unrestricted freedom to promulgate laws and generate profits, that Uriel VI was not given full license to rule until the year 307, when he was already 22 years old. He had been slowly assuming positions of responsibility for years, but both the council and his mother, who enjoyed even her limited regency, were loath to hand over the reins. By the time he came to the throne, the mechanisms of government gave him little power except for that of the imperial veto. This power, however, he regularly and vigorously exercised. By the year 313, Uriel VI could boast with conviction that he truly did rule Tamriel. He utilized defunct spy networks and guard units to bully and coerce the difficult members of the Elder Council. His half-sister, Morihatha, was, not surprisingly, his staunchest ally, especially after her marriage to Baron Ulf Gerson of Winterhold brought her considerable wealth and influence. As the sage Ugarij said, Uriel V conquered Esrianet, but Uriel VI conquered the Elder Council. When Uriel VI fell off a horse and could not be resuscitated by the finest imperial healers, his beloved sister Morihatha took up the imperial tiara. At 25 years of age, she had been described by admittedly self-serving diplomats as the most beautiful creature in all of Tamriel. She was certainly well-learned, vivacious, athletic, and a well-practiced politician. She brought the Archmagister of Skyrim to the Imperial City and created the second Imperial Battle Mage since the days of Tiber Septim. Morihatha finished the job her brother had begun and made the Imperial Province a true government under the Empress and later the Emperor. Outside the Imperial Province, however, the Empire had been slowly disintegrating. Open revolutions and civil wars had raged unchallenged since the days of her grandfather, Sepphoris II. Carefully coordinating her counterattacks, Morihatha slowly claimed back her rebellious vassals, always avoiding overextending herself. Though Morihatha's military campaigns were remarkably successful, a deliberate pace often frustrated the council. One councilman, an Argonian who took the Colovian name of Thoricles Romius, furious at her refusal to send troops to his troubled Black Marsh, is commonly believed to have hired the assassins who claimed her life in the Third Era, year 339. Romus was summarily tried and executed, though he protested his innocence to the last. Morihatha had no surviving children, and Eloisa had died of a fever 4 years before. Eloisa's 25-year-old son, Pelagius, was thus crowned Pelagius IV. Pelagius IV continued his aunt's work, slowly bringing back under his wing the radical and refractory kingdoms, duchies and baronies of the empire. He exercised Morihatha's poise and circumspect pace in his endeavours, but alas, he did not attain her success. The kingdoms had been free of constraint for so long that even a benign imperial presence was considered odious. Nevertheless, when Pelagius died after a notably stable and prosperous 29-year reign, Tamriel was closer to unity than it had been since the days of Uriel I. Our current emperor, His Awesome and Terrible Majesty Uriel Septim VII, son of Pelagius IV, has the diligence of his great-aunt Morihatha, the political skill of his great-uncle Uriel IV, and the military prowess of his great-granduncle Uriel IV. I meant Uriel VI before. Oh, Uriel V even. For 21 years he reigned and brought justice and order to Tamriel. In the year Third Era 389, however, his imperial battle mage, Jaeger Tharn, betrayed him. Uriel VII was imprisoned in a dimension of Tharn's creation, and Tharn used his sorcery of illusion to assume the emperor's aspect. For the next 10 years, Tharn abused imperial privilege but did not continue Uriel VII's schedule of reconquest. It is not yet entirely known what Tharn's goals and personal accomplishments were during the 10 years he masqueraded as his liege lord. In the Third Era, 399, an enigmatic champion defeated the battle mage in the dungeons of the Imperial Palace and freed Uriel VII from his other dimensional jail. Since his emancipation, Uriel Septim VII has worked diligently to renew the battles that would reunite Tamriel. Tharn's interference broke the momentum, it is true, but the years since then have proven that there is hope of the golden age of Tiber Septim's rule, glorifying Tamriel once again.